Yeah, especially this year.
Me too. Hey, Dave. I didn't have a chance to digest your email. I just got it.
So you too.
But I have some thoughts.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that presentation that you're doing. How do you like it?
So far, so good. One meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Getting started, so, but I.
Talk to you for yours.
We'll get started in a couple
Yeah.
minutes. Just waiting for a few more people to come in.
I was feeling. It was artificial.
Yeah.
Good. So right now, is it just Joe and Mark?
Oh, yeah, yes, online's just Jerry Long.
Yes. They finished. Okay. You can do it. Try, you
Reform it. Yeah. That's the goal.
We'll talk about it.
Sorry, we can stop with Graham about that and talk about it.
We'll talk about it with the team here. I'm just trying to, so Barb is not coming. Molly, Julia, Sarah, Dave, John, Eric. Kristen Grubbs wasn't sure. Joe, Andy, hadn't heard from Barry. Yeah, we can get started. Except for we don't have Dan Simon, who is our guest of our, hopefully he's coming.
still kind of do it, but I mean. Minutes is.
Oh, is it only 2 minutes? So I'm just trying to stay awake. So
I mean, I don't know, a lot of countries, 15 minutes is like normal, right?
Right. Couple more.
Is Connie talking?
I don't know. I'm gonna talk about.
Not as the rep, but.
Right. As a, I mean, she's welcome at any time, no matter what. We haven't, yeah.
Haven't touched her.
Yeah.
What's this guy?
Looks like marker with a fancy pen. Is it a Copic marker?
Thanks. The smart boards.
Oh, I think it's not what I thought it was, so.
I'm a dinosaur for that stuff. So I don't know. You're stronger than me. I didn't forget to take
And
it
I
apart.
have a
There you go.
As well. Just didn't know that it worked on my car. Yeah.
Yep, that's just gonna have, yeah, I'm waiting for the. Gotcha, I'll do the hearing, yeah, it's Thursday till more done. Just made a text them. Just text them. But from text, I mean, I'm a little. Oh, yeah, I think a lot of things we involved with. Yeah, so if you just keep your scribbling, it gets saved, does it like a picture? No, so yeah, what you see is yes.
That's, I was like, I'm glad that I read like it's unspoken and you understand.
Yeah,
Like, I-
absolutely.
Yeah. and it's sort of
Like
like-
at 24 in November. I mean, in Virginia.
So, because it does.
Yeah, I got a text from my sister today. She was supposed to be flying to North Carolina on Friday.
Well, Friday
For
might
the
be
weekend.
okay.
Yeah, but then she needs to hit back in
Oh, that won't be
for work
okay.
on Monday. So she was coming for my mom's birthday. Sounds like she might have to cancel, but we'll see.
Okay, gotcha.
We took Brew back in.
How you doing?
Speaking of bummers. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
You?
All right, went okay?
What?
They drove down. so-
They drove
Okay.
down, they hit a ton of snow, Mark did not tell me. Because I was working. So it took 11 hours to get to where they were staying outside of
So it's,
Georgia.
Yeah.
so it's like.
Wow.
But they stopped in spring, they wanted to visit the office.
Yeah.
But now it's gonna be-
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, okay. That's adorable. Well, okay, yeah.
It's all offline. It's the training.
And then we drove that.
Well, I don't know if they use this.
So
Yeah, right now. But this- Yeah. Second 90 days.
Does anyone have this one? Do you have this one?
Oh, I definitely have it on email.
Oh, cool.
Hey, John Eric, do you by chance have Dan Simon's contact info? I have his email, but I don't have.
Just.
I don't know. All right, I'm thinking we should get started and hopefully he comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. All right, why don't we get started? Hopefully Dan Simon from the Water and Sewer Commission will roll in at any moment, but if not, we'll figure it out. Who's online? Is there anyone outside of the committee online?
No.
No? Okay. So public comments. Done. I sent around the minutes from December. I hope everyone had an opportunity to at least look at them. Are there any comments?
Minutes. I thought they were very detailed.
I second that motion.
All right, we'll get those posted. Thank you. Like to welcome Sarah Hall, our new city council liaison. Sarah, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, but I know that you're familiar with the issue, I think. I was really happy to hear that you are our person, so welcome. Do you know everyone around
I
this
don't
table?
know everyone. Yeah.
Why don't we
Would you
just,
mind if we just?
yeah, why don't we
do
go around the
introductions
table?
around? Okay.
Just really briefly name and your city affiliation or volunteer kind of thing, and a little explanation is fine.
I'm Kelsey. I'm the new environmental planner, so I'm in the planning office with Amy.
Excellent.
Hi, Sarah.
Julia Godfredson, I was the former environmental planner in the planning office and original member of the Resiliency Committee. So staying on.
And planning director, obviously, we're gonna have a more thorough discussion of all kinds of areas, but
Great.
glad to have you here.
David Stroshine, volunteer.
Will people on Zoom gonna chime in or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Molly Attenborough. Hey, Sarah, Sustainability Manager.
We got 4 grease traps, so we burned through them quick.
Sorry.
And Joe Teixeira, the Conservation Chair.
Hi, Joe. I recognize your name.
Mm.
Been a supporter, so thank you.
Okay, just introduce yourself a little bit, or what do you
Yeah,
think?
so I asked to be put into this role, and thankfully the mayor gave me the opportunity to be the liaison here. I go way back with some of these folks, like Sarah, especially working with storm surge. I'm an environmental educator. I work for Mass Audubon. And so while I'm not, a scientist or professionally trained in that sense, I do teach kids and the community about issues around resiliency and sustainability or work. I originally got involved with storm surge through designing some educational materials. There's a few videos on their website. Are they still on the website? Okay, so if you look at their videos, there's teacher guides that I wrote that go along with their videos. So that was kind of my introduction to storm surge. And then I just got involved in going to the lectures. I saw your lecture, which inspired me to, follow along on the concerns around the water supply. And I attended, I think, nearly all of the meetings of the water infrastructure ad hoc.
Yes.
So, yeah, so trying to stay up to speed on all those issues and focus on some, community engagement and buy-in on these issues. Yeah.
I think
That's
you're
me.
gonna hit the ground running. And Sarah and I have talked a bit about the committee's work, but please stop us if you have any questions. 'Cause
Thank you.
you can be way more effective if you know what we're talking about.
Trying to get up to speed as quick as I can.
And it's a
Yeah.
lot of information, so don't ever complain.
Thank you.
So I'll just give a background on why Dan is on the agenda. And I will definitely get him back here. It sort of came out of the ad hoc committee of realization among, I think, everyone there at that point, we really do need to start talking a bit amongst ourselves, and especially with, different boards, but especially the Water and Sewer Commission. And so I met with, Dan, who's the chair of that commission, a few weeks ago. We decided, all right, well, a start is to attend each other's meetings. It might not be, just one person, but sort of trading up depending on time. And no real agenda from there. Hopefully, once we all get to know each other, we can sort of, is something I think will evolve naturally, but that communication is definitely the first step.
I got a question. Rick.
Yes, please.
Is Rick Parker still in attendance?
Rick is typically here. I didn't hear from him, but yeah, he's been at almost every meeting. He's on,
Oh, understood.
he's on the mailing list.
I kind of look at the elections kind of a pseudo beginning or something, maybe.
Mhm.
You know, Dan joined and I wasn't sure if Rick retired, so to speak.
Yeah,
So I wasn't sure if he's gonna stay on.
yeah, he's told me. So for a while it was Rick and Chip Wallace that were coming.
Gotcha.
And it was communicated that Rick was gonna take that over. He's no longer on Board of Selectmen in West Newbury, but he's still. is
Did you say
connected
they're
and
talking
he's
about
interested.
turning down the road?
Yes, I did. I was so disappointed to hear that.
Why? They got a grant, they did the one last year that was sort of the investigation of River Road. They got a follow-on action grant to do something. Well,
Like
the-
construction?
yeah, or at least more feasibility studies or something, and they're talking about turning it down, and I don't understand
Well,
why.
I read it was just capacity at the
It's-
town
you're
hall.
right,
They
that's
don't
right.
feel like they have a
Town doesn't
project
feel like-
manager.
That's
Sad.
awful.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Thought they could have built something into the grant for like a staff
Yeah.
support.
Thought there might have been, but I don't know. I haven't talked to Rick about that, but yeah, disappointing for a lot of people there, I'm sure.
You go through all that process of bidding.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes. So following from that conversation that I was hoping, Dan was just gonna introduce himself, was something that Andy and I were talking about with a few others, with Molly and John Eric yesterday, about a water capacity study that you're doing. Do you mind giving me?
Want me to explain that?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm just gonna take the visual for this.
Mhm.
I had a couple of visuals. I don't know if they'd be lengthy about it, but I do have some visuals that might be helpful for folks. So, sorry, who doesn't always listen to those photographs. So forgive me if I'm flipping through. I'm trying to find the right PDF, but Zoom like makes things work differently. So I'm trying to find the right PDF while I'm in here. And
Take your time, Andy. No, I'm gonna move those chairs out of the way, because I need them walk.
So I'm gonna try to be brief, but I have a couple of visuals just to show for context. Some apologies that are not coming in the correct sequence just because of the way that I have to work in Zoom here. But I had talked with the water department, and it kind of came to helpful fruition maybe at the end of December, right after the holidays, sort of with Pete King. We were talking about basically what I was trying to get on the radar was before we think about full build out in the city, recognizing the build out that the city has had already, the land use patterns and so forth, and where we have left to build out. Thinking about what meaningful chunks we still have to have multifamily housing, which is what draws the most water. Really, so at the end of the day, multiplying that out, I wanted to make sure we had on the radar somewhere master plan, land use and zoning efforts we're doing for say Story Avenue, which is what we're going to do. We don't zone or upzone for more than we can actually support the water supply. And so even though all that development's not going to happen all at once, these are kind of just labels as to where those things are kind of coming from.
Hey, Rick.
Hey, how you doing?
Come on in.
So if you have any questions, just let me know, but I'm just kind of briefly glossing the surface. I wanted to basically push out an update to the city council and the planning board. Just saying, we're diving into the Story Avenue effort, but one of the things we've been able to kind of, glean from that effort was, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of this table, but I have a certain reference, but to kind of get an idea in terms of how much water we use today, subtracting that from what we have, and we can draw down from the aquifer itself, which is one threshold, what you can actually draw down from the ground. That's one thing, but the plant itself can actually push out less water than we can draw down from the ground right now, so in terms of water that we can drink. So unless the plant is upgraded, which might remove that threshold and then go back to the aquifer as a limiting factor, perhaps. There's also a third threshold, which is the DEP's actual approval of our permit allowance. And so there might be three different thresholds. One of them is kind of regulatory in a way. So I'm putting that one aside for a second because that's a little bit could move up or down depending on the negotiations, so to speak, at the state. But at the end of the day, the aquifer is going to be completely limited at some point, and the plant, at least right now, it has a limiting factor in terms of cumulative water demand. So even though we're not at that threshold right now, I was trying to get on the radar, what will that actually be, and have that inform the rezoning that we do for the Sterling Avenue area, if nothing else, because that's the biggest chunk for new residential or multifamily residential that we could have in the city. And that's for a couple of reasons. So like one is the MBTA district, for instance, most recently, there's 1,292 units that are associated with that. We may not see all those units built out, but we have to kind of, for a placeholder right now, make the assumption that we're able to provide enough water for those, right? We're not over, doing what we can do. We've had discussions before, sorry, navigating into pain, but we've had discussions about the Waterfront West area, downtown, and if or when something's coming forward, actually, to the council of NED, that's actually being, plausibly moving forward in that form. We have to contemplate what that would be. So I, for exercise purposes, carry like a 200 unit placeholder, irrespective of any negotiation or discussion that might happen on the council floor about that. And we've seen several rounds of that, a placeholder, right? But if you look at the map of the city, there's not a whole lot of, I had gone after this grant a couple of years ago and we got carried a fiscal year or two, but partly because of MBT communities and us resolving that, partly due to a snap at the state level. And so we're back in here to pick up this exercise for Story Avenue. And the way I look at it is there's sort of three primary village nodes we have in the city. Maybe one is the downtown. We obviously recognize that feels like a walkable place, the kind of place you want to, hang out. The 40-yard district is starting to transition to that area, but it's not quite there yet, right? It's a little bit more auto dependent. But the Story Avenue area is kind of like their third village node, I would say, is not really addressed well enough in terms of its, what you experience when you're over there. You go there, you do your commercial stuff, and you leave. The housing developments are all kind of clustered together and so forth. So trying to look at that area, and I wanted to make sure that we had the water supply thing on the threshold. So we're going to do this exercise to look at what that area could transition and change into. But we know, for instance, as we blow up that area, we were contemplating originally this sort of study area. You can almost see that this is actually from plans or excerpted from the Kmart Plaza Landings project, but you can see how this part of the site is kind of already spoken for. So there's like 212 units. We kind of expected that'll be the mixture of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, that are proposed there. And so that portion of that area is already spoken for, but we have some opportunities elsewhere in the district. And recognizing that some of these smaller parcels that have uses that are taking up the whole piece, for instance, are not likely to be redeveloped in the near term, or might be more difficult to pile together and do something more substantial. But the larger parking lots, like the Market Basket or the Port Plaza, for instance, those still have more substantial opportunity to change the form of that area. And so one thing that we've discovered here essentially is in the water supply capacity, just boiling it all down, is looking at it. Actually, I want to maybe just show one more vision before going to the table. But looking at all that potential build out in the city, what we're trying to do as an exercise, I know these graphics may not be perfect, but see, it doesn't switch over for some reason on the Zoom. There we go. If for some reason it doesn't work down here when I'm Zoom. So this is just an illustration. This is someone else's illustration, but to show for like a given area how you could transform that area into auto dependence for all anywhere, and convert it into something that's more walkable, right? So the idea being you might have mixed use, you might have multifamily, but you have that activation. You have the streetscape is what's defining things, not parking lots. It's the parking's hidden, buildings define the streetscape and all that. So kind of envisioning what it could look like long term if we were to change that area. So again, just another example showing like what that, conceptually what might be able to happen there. And obviously making sure that we're all cognizant of what we can do for water supplies being a part of that. So it happened to be that Andrew Levine, when he was here, he had gone to the Harvard Kennedy School, I guess at one point. So it was a point of continuity for him. They had done a semester study, and so they just did this very quick exercise, broad brush exercise to kind of think about, well, what if we transition that area? And they went through a couple of options, high, medium, and low density kind of thing. How much of that total area we encompass with a rezoning change or redevelopment scheme? And just to give you an idea, kind of like looking at spectrum. And so I think the most potential for changing that area and thinking about long-term comes with these pieces that are easier to work with effectively. And so they're the ones where there's a huge parking. But there's other areas too, like the park and ride. We effectively put the park and ride aside. That's mainly because as we were looking at the cumulative water supply, by the way, there's one other graphic I'll show here from the Harvard Kennedy School study, which is So they did this, just a quick exercise to like, you know, if you're trying to get to that proper new urbanism sort of, experience, what does it look like if we transition this here, so it feels a little bit more. Now, granted, Story Avenue is a different thing, it's got Mass DOT's jurisdiction and all that, it's difficulty with that kind of stuff, but it was kind of to illustrate here, they were using Story Avenue, but it'll be easier in some other areas to do this, but to make it, feel more like Newburyport and function more like that and be more like a neighborhood as opposed to just where you go to do your commercial stuff and then disappear. So to me, that becomes harder to transition that area if you don't have some level of residential build out that's happening. In the case of the Kmart, we might know what's happening there, so, quote unquote, but we don't really know what's going to happen here long term. So we have the ability to kind of set the stage for what the zoning changes would be, what we would allow there. And there's also possibility across the street here, Nick was interested in doing something here. So we, contemplate that study area in this. But the long and short is that what we came down to was in trying to just throw onto a table and estimate, the total number, the usage we have today of water. And please don't get hung up on the specific numbers that I'm pulling up here, but just for illustrative purposes to look at the order of magnitude of how much residential build out we can still have going forward. Basically plugging in here and work at the water division, them looking at the water usage and me looking at the number of units that basically feasibly come out. You plug in something for the Plaza Landings, right? We have a very specific number there, 212 units. Waterfront West, just a placeholder for now. It could be somewhere in that range if and when it comes forward. Again, and we have ADUs, accessory dwelling units. That's hard to predict because of the way that works in zoning. It's very unique depending on which property is coming in and when. So that we just put in a placeholder of 100, for now. Thinking after a couple of decades, there might be that number there happening. So and then there's the MBTA district. We can at least plug in for now to be conservative and responsible. The total number that the state is expecting us to allow to happen in there from a zoning perspective. So we're not, counting that twice, where we need the water. And then there's other things like, the Story Avenue exercise, which is the main thing we want to pick up. We dropped off the park and ride lot, recognizing that there's really no capacity there. The water division essentially was coming back and saying, as we were looking at this, I was saying, we are like a higher end of build out 1,000 units and the total redevelopment over decades of time. What does that do to water supply? Whittling it down to more like a 500 unit, and depending on where you put those units in the Story Avenue area and how that works. Assuming all these other things are either built out, spoken for, contemplated or captured somewhere. We really came down to the idea of there's really sort of zero with a little bit of, fudge factor. There's not a whole lot of order of magnitude ability for us to support substantial new residential growth at Story Avenue. In cumulative, we look at the cumulative in the city. So we wouldn't necessarily be wanting to encourage that permitting and development right away. But I do think long-term it's beneficial for the city to envision what that could look like, how that area can change. And I think because it almost needs that residential to make that happen, to look at that and to think, all right, if there's a new plant down the road, that's the point at which we allow the folks to come in for permitting for those things. It may not be permitted right now or allowable right now, but we put on the books the form and the allowances that we do want so that when that happens, it's ready to go. It's an interesting thing because I think when the planning board and I first started this conversation, we were hoping that we would have a little bit more magnitude for residential units that we could contemplate beyond the Kmart. Not that we're encouraging every, building or site there to be a Kmart, right? The Plaza Landings project. But I think it's beneficial to have it in there for the mix. And so all this coming down to basically zero roughly sort of units to play with. You could debate whether the Waterfront West happens first or Story Avenue happens first, or the MBTA district which parcels come in and all that. It's not all going to happen at once. So we're probably not going to reach the threshold in which all of this water is being used at once, and we don't have a new plant or greater capacity at the plant to deal with it. But we do want to be responsible and plan well in advance and get on everybody's radar what that total build out is, so that at no point does any of this stuff get out of sync with itself, and we're not encouraging or permitting or giving somebody grandfathered zoning, allowances that allow them to propose development we can't support. So anyway, this all boils down to basically like as zero quote unquote units. It's not really a true zero because you could debate, this is a little bit, you can sort of move some numbers around here depending on what things happen. And I think there's a likelihood, irrespective of where things go in the coming year or two, that we'll probably end up having a new plant at some point during this time frame before all this build is happening. So I'm not as worried about that. But I do think that then we back into what does the aquifer allow us to draw down? We don't want to go any further, certainly, than that. And one of the conversations we had, when Jay and I were talking about yesterday is the buffer. So, talking with Pete more about what is that buffer? Is it 5%? Is it 10% or whatever that, buffer is, but recognizing there might be droughts, there might be other conditions, things that happen. And so, we have to have a little bit of room to play with as well. So this is really just kind of, I'm glossing the surface here, but just to kind of get across the point that, we're in our future land use discussions, the rezoning of Story Avenue, master plan effort as we think about things like sustainability, not just as a coastal community, those kind of sustainability issues, but just sort of build out. We think about water supply and what we can actually provide for, and then we set that as the ceiling essentially. And so we as a community know where that ceiling is. And here we don't necessarily charge it right away, but I do think we should contemplate in the rezoning effort what that could look like with the residential, and we allow it in the right time frame to happen that way, such that when a new plan comes on, we can do it. But we, again, still don't ever exceed what that zoning allowance in Story Avenue, Willow Street area. We never exceed cumulatively for the city how much we can provide for water. And so there's some other things in here, like some non-residential uses and how those might fit in, little incremental growth that might happen in some of those areas. Then there's the across the town line, commitments to the IMAs and municipal agreements to Newbury and West Newbury. So again, the biggest number that we're really talking about here is the MBTA, district commitment, for a state statute. So that's the bigger number. But anyway, all this boiling down, the quick synopsis is that we're not thinking there's any immediate, latitude or ability to have, substantial residential. It probably wouldn't be happening that way anyway, as a practical matter, that increase all at once. But it allows us to think about those two scenarios. What do we allow to happen in zoning and development now? That might be shorter term changes that can help to transition that area and make it a better place to be. But also longer term, once we're able to support more residential, might then allow folks to come in for the permitting to do that in those other areas. And allow us to then transition the Story Avenue area into something that's a little bit more, for lack of a better term, sort of inviting or more of a Newburyport experience than just what you have today, which is moving over. But what we have today, which is mainly everything's dependent on the car, it's not very walkable. The multifamily housing developments are usually separate, silos almost down here. They're not really mixed in, so you have to cross Story Avenue. So trying to see what we can do with the more workable areas like this. And that's really what is going on and what I want to roll into the discussions with others. But it goes to sustainability. It's less to do with like climate change in some ways, and climate change certainly can affect the water supply and droughts and whatnot, but it's not the coastal, resiliency sustainability issues that we certainly need to talk about as a coastal community. It's the total build out water supply resiliency, factor that we want to consider here. So we have a little bit more information to go on here. It'll help to inform us going forward. I don't think it should change the ability to roll in and think about some residential, but we wouldn't really be immediately thinking about the parking right lot now. We're kind of putting aside for a moment the parking right because we're focused on the city area first. If the state wants to come back and talk to us about that, we talk about that as a second thing, but we're not necessarily focused on it or encouraging it because that would just add more units that might compete with what we're trying to do and the areas we're trying to change. So that's a lot, kind of quickly, and I know I talked for a while, but if there's any questions, let me know. I just want to make sure we kind of have that on your radar as a sustainability, thing.
Molly, I see your hand up. And Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to add to conclude to make it to kind of summarize. What's important for resiliency with this is, there might be enough water in the aquifers, but what about the water plant that will need to be upgraded? But also more importantly for this group, as John Eric mentioned yesterday, is drought. So drought conditions in the future could have a significant impact. So that's what's really relative to the Resiliency Committee, not just, what's happening with climate change, but also drought as a result of that. And then we also discussed, meeting with the fire department and talking about their needs as well. That's it.
On the drought for a minute?
Yeah.
Go ahead, droughts. They're just talking about droughts.
Because it's not gonna be long.
Okay, so a couple questions. One is the water storage issue. Was the tank up on top of the hill by the hospital? It has enough room to maintain pressure for.
I can't, unfortunately, can't answer that question. It's not an area I'm familiar with in enough detail to know how that fits in there. So I have to defer to them. That's more of like a collection distribution thing to some degree. So it may not be, I think my initial focus, at least thus far, has been the plants themselves.
Okay.
And then we have the secondary issue, which is like the collection and distribution lines of water and sewer.
Okay. Yeah, that was the second question with the sewer. They can handle the increase of the 212, so.
So,
You guys keep
the
talking
sewer plant doesn't seem to be our primary limit right now.
Okay.
And I want to have that inform the process here, but the water one was the one where we're like, all right, we gotta start here. This is it's kind of setting a ceiling for us to start working with or thinking about. So that was kind of driving most of it.
And then this might be a segue for your question on the drawdown for the reservoir, the aquifers. Has that been tested to see how close to capacity during
A drought or whatever.
drought or recent climate change, or weather, meteorological changes?
I'm gonna defer to folks like Pete, John, Eric, you probably had more discussion with those folks. I know that we're obviously much more sensitive or attuned to those things, and I think we need to be much more cognizant and planning for the worst case scenario with some of those things. I don't know, the specific data. I'd have to defer to folks like Pete in the water division on, because I don't have enough of that myself to know.
And just to follow on that, when you were referring to the aquifer and the capacity of the aquifer, are you talking about the reservoirs or?
All of it together, so whether it becomes from like the number
The
2 well
entire-
near
okay, the
Evergreen,
entire
the
system.
entire system.
Got it.
Yeah, sorry,
You're not
I
talking
know.
subsurface.
I was just thinking, I thought you meant subsurface, and I was like, well, I don't think we have that many wells, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm thinking the entire water supply, so if you think about like the small percentage coming from the number 2
Yep.
well, and then you got the entire, so whether it's Indian Hill or it's the, Artichoke, and however we do any capital projects and how we do it, change any of that. Looking at the total water supply, because to my understanding anyway, one of the things I feel like I learned years ago from, I think it was Paul Cooley, was just the idea that they, and I actually came across something a few hours ago, but sort of the city had looked at a bunch of other sites in the city previously and hasn't really determined there's any other place in the city we can draw down the water. So that we exhausted all efforts within the city, right? The only one that happened when I was here was this discussion when the Evergreen Commons subdivision was being done up here. The city did some testing, right? We figured out whether or not there was any conflict with the city's ability or need to get water there, and determined, that wasn't something that was going to be viable or useful. So that was what, we walked away from that, and of course that development then proceeding, but it's all the water together. So, and assuming that we're not getting any other wells in Newburyport, they're going to provide more water, so that's the fact.
So as far as the drought, the way that I think our group should look at it, and I think you guys would agree, it's not rocket science, but we have 3 reservoirs and there's a certain volume. This volume for our reservoirs is 1 billion gallons, okay? So out of 1 billion gallons, divide by how many millions of gallons a day that is the demand, then you have how many days that the volume can provide water if we get no rain. So 1 billion gallons divided by 2,000, say the plant was 2 MGD. That came out to, I believe, 17. I didn't bring my calc, but I think it was 17 months.
Yeah, sounds right.
So 17 months of no rain, we have no water. I did a calc for 3 million gallons a day. The reason for the upgrade is our job is resiliency and climate change. And we always have to remind the city that don't forget. Because if they increase the capacity thinking they're doing a good deed, that 3 million gallons a day from a new plant only gives us 11 months of no rain drought. Now, that said, we all have our own opinion about, you do not have to be involved with meteorology or anything. It's pretty basic. But think of it this way, our watershed is landing on various type of ground surfaces. So if we get no rain, that's just an even calculation. No rain, take the volume, you still have evaporation. So I'm not including evaporation, which is actually pretty high in the summer, by the way. The reservoirs from Oklahoma that I saw some studies on from the University of Oklahoma is like 6 to 10 inches, vertical inches of the reservoir a day when you have windy, dry, windy,
Yeah.
very dry southern United States desert wind conditions. Don't go there. We don't have that. But the point is that it's there.
It's like incredible when you see it.
It's there.
Yeah.
It's there. So the only in everything I'm saying is not an alarmist. It's just facts that we have to make sure that we take into account. So let's say the argument from the other side is, well, we aren't gonna have 11 months of no rain. Okay, that's fine. But we might have 11, you guys know that we're 44 inches a year. You probably know, I mean, you guys all know that, right? So let's say we get 6 inches in a year, which is pretty close. I mean, this last year, we aren't getting much rain. So if you get 6 inches of rain, the calc that Dave was asking, which we need to do, and it's gonna be a modeling, it's not gonna be perfect, is for every amount of runoff, and I can do, standard modeling, but this is much more intense as far as in our particular watershed for 6 inches, how much is actually going into the reservoir? I can determine the calculation crossing over land from point A to point B, but that's a very rough that we use for like detention ponds and basic civil engineering stuff. Okay. This is different because if you have dry conditions and you get an inch and an inch and an inch, it's not even making the surface because it depends on how it's spread out over inches per day. So whatever scenario you want to come up with for a drought condition, think of this past year. Every time I'm watching the news, and I don't know how many inches we've had, but they're always talking about quarter inch for the last 6 months. Have we had 3 inches in one day?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Aren't we like 20 inches below normal right now? And that's just a Google search away. That's not neither here nor there. But we're in the middle of it. So 11 months with no rain. I look at that as, Tehran's running out of water. Bit different issue, that's the desert. But South Africa did. Different issue. The point is they had years. We don't have years of storage.
No, and even if
I
we
mean,
get half of what.
We don't have years of
typically-
storage. I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but 11 months to me is not much buffer.
No.
And then you take 11 months, that's strictly from the use. You can do conservation, cut that off, so it's 22 months. Fine, great. You also have fire. What happens with drought? You get fire. We have Maudsley and Mosley. We have some wooded areas. A fire hydrant's 2,000 gallons a minute. I mean, all this stuff is Googleable. It's just easy counts. 2,000 gallons a minute is like, 2 million gallons a day. How many hydrants do they do in California to put those fires out? I mean, that's just one hydrant. Are we gonna need that? I don't know. I'm not trying to be a fearmonger, but if the city doesn't take drought into consideration in a very hardcore, full stop, we need to shut down development a lot sooner than we really think. Because building a new plant with an increased capacity is not the issue. Part 2, fire supply. This has been coming up in our group for like 10 years. But it is about time that our particular fire department in our community look at alternative water sources for fire protection. Because if those the wooded areas that we have need to be sprayed, they need to be suppressed for fire. Well, here's the thing, Merrimack is better than the ocean.
Yeah.
Like saltwater, I've read, it's really bad for the trucks. I mean, it's really bad for so many things.
Bad for the
The pumps.
Yeah. Places,
Ecosystem,
yeah.
right?
Oh, no, and that's exactly it, but that's a lot of people that.
Yeah.
Just putting salt water in the woods
Not cool.
is changing the ecology.
Yeah, yeah.
You guys know that. I'm looking at Concom. So those are things people haven't really thought of. Well, let's just use salt water. Well, you can't. Maybe you can do it for a short period of time, but I don't think so.
Extreme emergency, but you'd be sacrificing the regeneration.
Correct.
Yeah.
So all I'm doing is bringing it to the table. The Merrimack River, do we want peace? Not to exaggerate.
Is it too?
Do we want Merrimack River to be all over our Maudsley so the kids go into Maudsley after a fire and,
It's better, that's way better.
yeah, but I mean, this is still pretty nasty.
Well, it is, but that infiltrates. I mean, that's like, we have the farms or whatever.
Totally fine. And I'm not shutting it down. I'm not shutting it down. That's
But
totally
the
fine.
point is, it really truly needs to be a consideration
Well,
when coming up.
It needs to be a consideration. And one easy thing is is driving irrigation wells, not for public water supply, but
fire.
when Paul Kobe did an extensive search for water supply, that's a different volume. They needed a certain yield.
Right.
Fire protection, in my opinion, put it outside of our watershed so we aren't stealing our own recharge. And just litter the city with wells in various places and see what that comes up with. This is out of my realm. I'm just saying,
So you mean just
tap the water-
tap the water table for the hydrant,
for fire protection,
fire protection?
massive
Yeah.
emergency, we're in a drought, only use that when that water, say, is in the wells I'm talking about are in the business park,
Yeah,
outside of the watershed of our water supply.
yeah, that makes sense.
So, Jenna, when you talk about taking water out of the Merrimack, where would you do that? How far does the salt lens go upriver?
So the good
That's
news,
been a question I've asked in West Newbury
Right.
for years.
yeah, we gotta,
It goes up around the bend.
Depends on storms, tides.
yes, and we got a good answer. I called Merrimack River Council this past year,
Okay,
and they're just starting to know what that answer is. But the plume does reach the Artichoke River, but
It's a wedge.
saltwater is heavy,
Yeah.
so it's on the bottom and it
Salt
stays
wedge.
there. So any extraction from the river would be on the top. And that's good news for everyone, for our business, because this lower dam, as far as, salt water getting into the reservoirs, the lower dam's gonna stop a lot of salt's heavier,
Yeah. it'll come.
just so that we know that, yeah.
All right, thank you. So something that's come out yesterday and love to get everyone's thought is, John Eric and Andy both mentioned it, and Molly, a buffer. And so what is that number? I think Andy mentioned 5 to 10%, but that almost, I think, requires precision in that modeling, right? And I'm thinking building projects, 20% contingency is a default. If I said that somewhere else, people might think I'm absolutely nuts. But you think about those drains, and it's 20% left, that's not a heck of a lot of water to play with. It's a little bit different.
Well, this is
Thought
really
process?
interesting, and I wonder if we can borrow lessons from like California. and
Well,
other
that's what I
places.
think someone
Yeah.
here, I would love to have and just look at what
Yeah.
other communities.
They ran out of
Because
water
it's
during those
fine,
fires. There's some
for-
towns that the hydrants were dry.
Totally. And
So they
we
must
should-
be doing that kind of modeling, and if we can learn from others, that would be fantastic.
Based on everything that I've seen in my career today, anyway, I think a lot of it comes, it's not that there aren't necessarily the tools to do it, right? It's just that the alignment, and I've actually seen like it's the political wherewithal, right? But like actually voting for zoning changes that do this or that, right? I mean, our budgets are all based on growth, right? Every
Right.
year, everybody wants to hear about new growth, right? Well, you can't have new growth at some point if you're not growing indefinitely, right? So this is a worldwide problem. It's whether it's the country or the state, right? It's not sustainable to grow indefinitely, right? And so, if we look at that from the same lens in the Newburyport, I think we should have whatever buffer that is, right? And we back out of that. I would like to, hopefully, I defer the numbers here because I care more about the water supply the other day. But I'd like, hopefully we come up with something where it allows sufficient residential, this is me putting back in the urban planner sort of Adam, but allows sufficient redevelopment of the Story Avenue area to properly define that as a proper neighborhood for the city, still having the same amenities and whatnot, but maybe having a better neighborhood there in a lot of ways. But never exceeding that threshold essentially. And I think the good thing for us is because we have a good amount of horizontal development in the city already, or it's preserved as open space, or it's restricted because of different things. We also can now more easily determine, what should happen or what can happen. And I think this is largely the bigger chunk of where something can happen. So we're able to control that, piece of it. But I'd like to see some capacity or hopefully ability to do that, whether that's from a plant or recognizing the aquifer. I do also think at the end of the day, no matter what, the buffer, if it's 20%, whatever that buffer is, should be in there. And then we should use that ceiling and always kind of refer to that ceiling, that order of magnitude ceiling, so that at no point in the city is the city ever continuing to look at economic growth and build out and, new tax revenue without actually saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't actually support that, right? It's not sustainable. And that becomes the new norm as the sustainability of Newburyport. And it might mean that there's no further horizontal growth, that there's no more, new residential being built out in substantial numbers anyway.
So, and we talked about the master plan is going to be revamped, and so, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to be presenting this soon anyway to the council. and the planning board, and we talked about how important it is to preface any of this and give it context within that resiliency scope. So, even if we don't have that number, that we need to have that number, we need to have a buffer there, and we need to consider emergency management and fire
Right.
suppression.
Right.
So just to frame that conversation so that it's almost, hopefully, Sarah, you want, and everyone on the council will hear it a number of times, and so eventually it become a question, well, what about drought? How is drought affecting this number? In an ideal world.
If let's say that we come up with, the buffer, the percentage that we want to apply to all this, would you be looking at that as, because I'm thinking about this now, similar to how we looked at sea level rise, like we should be planning for drought the same way we're planning for sea level rise, where each individual project has to show how they would be dealing with this future incremental level. So let's say we come up with this buffer for water supply. Are you thinking you apply that, you just say, okay, the water supply capacity the city has is now just 10% less or 20% less or whatever? Or are you saying that at which point, projects that come in can use up that capacity until all of a sudden we're at that percentage, and then no more projects can be built? Or do you say each individual project that comes in has to show how, let's say, they would have used X, Y, and Z water? Now they're gonna show us how they can use 20% back through irrigation or through whatever they're not gonna be using.
I mean, as a practical matter, just based on everything that I've seen, I would rather see, and also be able to rely upon as a backstop, the zoning, for instance, does not permit, at the end of the day, the total build out that would be cumulative to exceed that threshold. To me, that would be illogical to allow that in the zoning, for instance, and probably do things, the little loopholes that are allowed under grandfathering of subdivision plans and all that kind of stuff. So putting all that nonsense aside, there's still a risk, so I think we try to codify it in there back into, from the numbers, into what we can allow in different areas remaining to build out. And we do that, but I also think, to your point, like Pete, and I were talking, and it's more of a water division thing, it's a mayor and city council thing, but to what extent, not just the new developments, Kmart Plaza Landing said there's a decision, has some language in it about low flow, and your fixtures and whatnot, but to have new developments coming in, what are they committing to? Are there any citywide parameters beyond a drought, and then they're calling for no irrigation or lawns? Is it any kind of citywide standard about what you're using the water for? I mean, those are other things that should be considered, and I think that should go in there too. But I would also like to think, so that we're not sort of risking it, I would like to see the zoning still aligned with that total maximum, even though we're still trying to also conserve the use of water. Yeah.
I would just hate to see, because what you've shown in terms of your planning for all these build out areas is what we want to see happen in the city for various reasons, not just for water supply capacity, but because we want to see certain areas function more as communities or neighborhoods or whatever. And so to have to shut off certain ones because we've already reached capacity seems a shame, when if we could figure out how to let that all happen with a lower level of water use and allow that buffer.
Agreed. Yeah.
The comment I made yesterday about the 110 gallons a day. So for your line of work with the boards, all the engineering calcs, for the 40B, those are based on a DEP design flow rate on 10.
Per bedroom, you're talking about.
Per bedroom. So for anyone that is in the know with that, it's 110. The reality is that we're the United States and Newburyport is estimated about 65 gallons a person.
Right.
Per day.
Yeah.
Usually it's one person per bedroom. So whatever that calculation for those things come out to be, and it's just a matter of taking 212 or taking 30,980 divided by 212 to figure out what the gallons were. Make sure you're dealing with apples and apples, because
like the bedroom counts and
the Pete Kings of the world will deal with reality. The regulators will deal with 110. So when you get a project permitted, it has to meet the 110.
Yeah.
So the conservative part would be, let's deal with the 110.
Yeah.
Citywide conservativeness.
Right.
The buffer could be reality, we're only doing 60.
I agree.
I just leave that to you, that when you show your numbers, make sure that your audience knows precisely what you're looking at. Otherwise, you're gonna be caught
So we've been.
fudge, being accused of fudging numbers or whatever.
Yeah,
you
I
know.
mean, the 110 is the threshold or the measure that we're using for the.
Okay.
Yeah.
None of those are using 65?
No, not in our discussion that
Okay.
there was never any suggestion that we use the 65 for that, yeah. And I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not in the water division, so I don't do all the stuff that they do, but updating the permit from DP, getting the water withdrawal permit, the length of time it takes to do it and how many years between when they do it. There's obviously, just like anything else in government, there's probably still a bit of a disconnect between like the DP end that's dealing with the permit for water withdrawal and dealing with all that. And then the folks who are working in housing and development who are saying like, you got to adopt this zoning to allow multifamily housing around train stations. And I'm in support of that. The MBTA community stuff, I think it makes a lot of sense, but there's not always that reconciliation between two different areas of public interest, are the housing folks all talking to, the development folks all talking to the folks that are saying, well, where can we draw down that water? And so like Newbury, for instance, having a discussion, well, are they gonna have utilities run for a longer length and try to pull from Newburyport for a development that's, meeting the MBTA requirements on their side of the town line? Because, they don't have any other water source, they're not finding any other, possibility there. It just illustrates the fact that like, there's not always a fully informed decision when it comes to land use regulations, informed by the water supply piece, but at least we can try to do it here locally in Newburyport, make sure that the land use decisions are informed by what we can provide for water long term, even if it's not happening across the Commonwealth, completely or, in other cities and towns.
Another thing, I think Molly brought this up yesterday, is looking at any parcels that might be good for conservation land. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm bringing that up for the Concom people here.
Yeah.
That I don't, the ownership, it's private right now, but
Yeah.
there might be a potential.
Some of the bigger farm tracks, for instance, like following the city's pattern it's had over the years of trying to preserve that agricultural or open space land, right? As opposed to seeing it, converted into residential units that both takes away from environment and resources and then, the plants and animals, but also takes away from agricultural land that could be used and, close or not in Newburyport. And doesn't then add to the water supply or water demand. So it's multiple reasons we should also consider, CPA funding or any other grants that we can go after to try to preserve those remaining pieces that are undeveloped.
So in terms of this committee, there's the buffer question. And we haven't really talked about how that gets done, but it needs to be done. John, you talked about modeling, but I would like to sort of have a better understanding of what how other communities are approaching it. As well, like what kind of, unless you already know, but what kind of modeling, just so that we can have like.
I do not.
All right, so
Yeah.
if someone could, take that on, if anyone's. up for it.
What, you hear
In terms
an
of
awful lot.
looking at-
Modeling, what part of modeling?
I don't know. Just
So what's a reason?
in general, or how other communities that are facing drought have dealt with this capacity issue and, if they're putting a hard stop on development due to water capacity, how have they dealt with it?
That's a great point. What I recommend
Yes.
is everyone's, this isn't new for, resiliency, people are still getting out their butts to do
Oh,
something.
yeah, we're all learning.
But yeah, we're 40 years late, but so there's no excuse for not doing anything. I would personally, instead of going to communities, go to communities, but I would also go to engineering firms that absolutely
That's true.
deal with true watershed management, not BS of writing nice reports and all this other garbage, but true planning for drought. Probably gonna be a firm out of California, because we have never had droughts in New England that are worthy of having engineers pick up that market here. There's not much of a market for drought management in New England, in my opinion. I've worked with plenty of engineering firms, and drought management is just something that DEP says, oh, you need a drought management plan. That's a copy and paste from the next company.
So far, anyway.
Oh, my God, yeah.
So I wonder if there are
Yeah.
any grants available too, hopefully.
I think that's the right idea too, because every location is gonna have a different capacity, a different need for a different kind of a buffer based on their population, whatever, all those characteristics. It's different than sea level rise, which we can. model
What type of water supply? Is it aquifer?
Right.
True aquifer, water surface?
Yeah,
Every community is extreme on the coast, not on the coast.
so you couldn't really just borrow someone else's number.
You absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
You
No, but
also,
we could find out who they're using.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
Do
how
that
they
analysis.
went about getting that analysis done.
So
Sorry, Dave.
you also want to look at political environments, because I know in St. George, Utah, they were talking about building a pipe from Lake Powell over to St. George. So we're looking at 150, 200 miles through very terrain, very topography. So the reason I bring that up is political climate changes how communities address things, even though there's a true need for addressing them. Some of the politics say, there's no problem. Like you pointed out in the past, cut and paste, people don't pay attention to it until it's a problem. So certain areas, depending on the politics, may not approach the problem as seriously as a true condition for them.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Yeah. Thank you. Something else that, I think I would like to consider is bringing in Pete King from the water division and, someone from the fire department. So hopefully Chief Bradbury and maybe the lieutenant, so that we can really have that discussion in terms of emergency management and how, just to make sure that there's clear communication between those two.
Has there been any discussion, has there ever been any discussion about using the mall pond as a water storage?
That's how it was built.
Water storage
That's
for
how
fire.
it started. That's how the fire system in
Yeah.
1895.
There are still drain, like there's.
We still have the pipe connection going down all those cisterns.
Just a dead end.
I am a proponent of getting that started again. Because
I mean, that's a.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not very big though.
No, it's not very big, but it's every little bit helps.
Right.
And
You can fill it up.
the cisterns that I saw in town, they're huge underneath,
Fill it.
it was not, I mean, it was, federal prospect,
I'll put in a grant.
huge I mean, you could fit a Greyhound bus in that thing.
Oh,
Well, that's like existing infrastructure right now?
Yeah,
Oh, wow, okay.
but
Operational?
a
That's the
piping-
question.
no, no,
Okay.
it's a piping network from the mail down.
Mhm.
And we were gonna use that. I did a lot of investigation for the mail improvements for a cleanup mail, Kim Turner's project. And, so the piping's there and I traced it down. You just have to replace some valves. The pipe is probably usable, but there's a million things, without details, you can slip line it. The point is resurrecting that. I think the younger generation in the fire department would love it. Because it's not that expensive if you find out that the pipe's intact. Couple cisterns that you throw in a pump. It's not gonna take out a fire for an entire block, for every little bit helps.
Wait, are you talking about using the
front one
for this, like,
The pond
like?
behind-
Yeah,
reopening up?
yeah.
You think that pond has enough capacity to do anything? It's so shallow.
Oh, a totally different animal that you would have to have the outlet change.
Yeah,
I mean,
Well,
I'm
we're,
just talking about the
right.
possibility.
I
Yeah.
think we should.
I'm
look
only
into
answering
it.
questions here, the
You have
possibility of
volume.
resurrecting it.
Yeah, no, I
There's
think we
volume.
should. I think we should.
Yeah,
We can talk.
yeah.
Where's this?
the.
Where is this?
Frog pond.
I mean.
Frog Pond. Oh boy. That's a whole nother question.
Really gotten out into the weeds.
A lot of the bottom few floors of the house, but I think we.
I
think we should talk to them.
All right, okay, so it sounds like we have two things that, talked about. One is the buffer and finding, hey guys,
Sorry.
come on. How are we gonna go about this buffer and modeling question? Like, if it's not us, who can we
Well,
ask about it?
Something else, I will be reaching out already again to Pete to pick up this discussion, we're working more on this, but also with Chris Pratt, because you asked, I'm assuming it's the same kind of thing. I'll be picking that discussion up anyway, because I have to inform like where we're doing here as best I can, so if anybody wants to sort of piggyback on that, or want to circle back here in this committee, I already have to have that discussion to some degree, because I also agree with the idea of having a bigger buffer and
Mhm.
wanted to make sure it's at least, responsible, conservative, rather than, err on the loose side and say, well, we'll
Right,
figure it out when
right.
we get there.
So you're gonna talk to Pete,
To Pete, yeah.
and then Julia, did you just say that you might look into it?
I will, I mean, because I'm interested in it and all that. My question is, though, don't we have a contract for watershed management with whoever it would have? And why
Yeah.
would they not be helping us with this?
I'm not-
Or why couldn't we ask them?
I would have to look into whether they're qualified to truly what we're looking into.
Okay, got it.
Could you though? And then we'll have that answer and then we'll go from there.
Cause if they.
Well, I'm stepping on other people's toes, because now we're at a point where we have managers that are managing all those
Yeah.
projects. P King's managing that one.
All right, so that's Pete.
Yeah.
So Andy will
Okay.
talk to Pete about
Yeah,
that.
the water division, I don't wanna speak for it, obviously, the water division has used several consultants over the years, right? It's not just one. And, we had a discussion with one that was for the watershed management, side of it, is discussion there. And I brought up during the conversation with one of those consultants, the idea of working with West Newbury to say, hey, shouldn't their land use regulations and activities around the water supply be comparable in terms of making sure things don't go into the water, right? And it was surprising to me that it seemed like a sort of a novel concept to them to sort of roll it into the scope of work, so to speak, whether or not there's a change in the contract or not. That, like, to me, I don't know, I don't want to speak for them as to who the right consultant should be. But I don't know that that gap is full completely right now, because there's in certain areas that I think we don't need to revisit, whether it's the existing consultants or whether there's some specialized consultant that focuses in this area, that area. I'm a little bit confused myself as to why there's several consultants that work on the water supply side of things. Is it obvious why we're shifting between them, or whether the area of focus for one, is there a loss of continuity when one consultant brought in because they don't know the background, the other stuff? I'll leave, defer to the water division on that, but somehow I think we need to fill that gap where someone, or some consultant working with the water division can help to fill that gap.
I mean,
Yeah.
for the water supply, I put the RFP out. So the watershed management, I put the RFP out because I requested that someone look into it because we're a little bit late on this.
I agree.
So, I thought Nick Federico and I could do it because we're civil engineers and we can. I know we can. What I did is I convinced ourselves and convinced the city, the mayor, even though we could do it in-house, let's get someone that has done it. What I've learned is that we could have done it.
Done.
That's not
Talking about the buffer,
Done what?
coming up with a
watershed management.
measure.
Oh,
They have the experience, yes, but it's not too far from basic civil engineering.
Yeah.
Okay. All I'm saying is that that's what we hired. We picked companies and I found a company to do it. Wood and Kern. Basic New England style watershed management. I was being polite. I don't know if they're qualified for the drought because I don't know how big of a company they are.
Mhm.
My gut is no. I heard you say something about a gap, but if the existing people that we have aren't suitable, my gut is we need someone from the West Coast.
So
Just keep that in mind. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow,
What other
keep that in
firms are
mind.
out there that have done this for other places that have
That's
drought situations?
Truly
I'll come up with a list of
drought.
firms that-
awesome.
yeah, truly drought management with runoff calcs. Yeah.
But, and at the same time, we'll have a conversation with Pete.
Yeah, and hopefully this
To get
gets,
that
as any of this is rolled in, if we have to revisit, it,
Absolutely.
we rolled in so that there's, we're all on the same page with the water division,
Yeah.
the spokesperson there, whatever that is, and it's informed one way or the other about these, because, he's also not dealing directly with the experiences elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what
We've
occurred,
already been through it,
they may be qualified. I do not want to dismiss the fact that they may be qualified.
Yeah.
We just
Oh,
need to
agreed,
know.
agreed.
And this needs
Yeah.
to be integrated into whatever that is.
So Ipswich has done a ton of work on this.
Mhm.
They may have some experience.
Yeah. I was
That's
thinking that,
fantastic
too.
because that river runs dry every other
And
year.
they
Yeah,
had
okay.
studies going and other stuff.
And they have a new plan
Also, yeah,
going in.
those river watershed, I think there's a group of communities that all participate and or have, they've been drawn down.
Because everybody wants to pull the same water, right?
Yeah.
They have done,
Yeah.
what is it,
They're
Pine,
just from the
like the
river.
Pine River, they've done
Yeah.
an amazing
Right,
job, just being
but-
collaborative.
I know there was a project several years ago where they were trying to understand that watershed.
Yeah.
And I don't recall, it was probably a dozen years ago, that I read about it, and I don't know.
Oh, there's
I-
one more
Look at that
recent than
too.
that,
Yeah,
the last
probably
3
still
years.
going on.
So maybe Hannah, who works with the Eight County.
Yeah,
Park,
true, that'd be good, yeah.
Or, maybe the Ipswich River
Yeah,
watershed.
yeah, Sarah just
Right.
said Pie Rivers, like,
Yeah, fine.
so will you reach out?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I wanna, we have a little less than a half hour left, so I don't wanna, not get to everything else. But it's a much briefer conversation. But also, I think when we have some answers after we've had that conversation with Pete, hopefully he'll be
Circle
up for
back.
coming in
Yeah.
and, with fire management as well. To get that conversation. Alrighty. All right, moving on, MVP 2.0, just a update on where we are. Kelsey or Molly, are you up for just giving a quick?
Yeah, I can take that. We're forming a core team, so we have our city employees. I think there's 6 of us, and we're hoping to recruit 5 residents, with community liaisons who would sit and be part of the core team. So we're still in that process, although we're hoping to wrap it up by next week. We interviewed 4 people. Unfortunately, 1 dropped out, so we're looking to extend acceptance letters to 3 of those people. And then we haven't set up the meetings that will come after that, but the spring will be really busy with meetings, doing public outreach and brainstorming. Molly, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I would just say, yeah, it's too bad one of the top ones had to pull out because of time commitments. But Sarah or Jane, do you have any other ideas? And I was thinking, because last night I went to the that new grant making organization, Awesome Newburyport, I think it's called. And Jill Haley is part of that. Would she be a good person?
Wonder, I can ask Jill. Yeah.
Or I can just send her the email if she can check it out and see if she's interested.
Or Carrie, I mean, Carrie's one of the organizers.
Yeah, she's one of the Patty.
Carrie Patty might be interested.
I just whoever, we just need people that are kind of on the ground level, understanding the various populations. And I'll reach back out to the woman from St. Paul's. She had an initial interest, but I don't know if she submitted anything. Do you know if she did, Kelsey? That would be Bonnie Schultz. I didn't hear anything, but I'll reach back out to her. But if anyone has any other ideas of people that are kind of on the ground, knowing where our vulnerable populations are in town. We need at least one. We need at least one more.
Disability Council? Yeah. We don't have, I don't know who's on there anymore.
How about somebody from the Disability Council?
Kristen Farrell is the chair. I know her.
That's a good idea.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell me what this group like?
MVP 2.0?
Yeah, just a brief. What is this?
Who would like to take that?
I will.
Yes.
Go for it.
So we had our MVP 1.0 certification a long time ago. That makes us eligible for MVP action grants, which is the big pool of money for things like the revetment law. We got $1 million. That's the big pot of money in that. They 2 years ago or 3 years ago decided that all of the towns that are currently certified at 1.0 need to go through a 2.0 recertification, which is a lens of social justice, environmental equity, that kind of stuff. So 2.0 is a process of basically revisiting our resiliency plan, the action items that are in that, with a group that's been trained on environmental justice, and see if that core team that Kelsey's describing would make any changes to the priorities based on considering it through the lens of social justice.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very well-defined process. It's a lot of kind of considered check the box, but we have to go through it or we won't be eligible for any more funding from the action grants.
I would just, if I could supplement, I think one is, like the word engagement, like community engagement, even though you guys did a fair amount of work in the last year or two on community engagement, unfortunately, those things didn't qualify, the work that had been done previously, there was 300,000, it was a big grant, a lot of different efforts. That unfortunately doesn't satisfy that, engagement, community engagement piece. They want to see some more of that, so we're doing that piece. That makes us eligible for future funding, but we also have in the second year of this grant, the assumption is we're working on some specific project or initiative that the community can engage in, and almost like a Charette sort of, involved in that one focus area. It's a tool to help the community really understand resilience and sustainability issues, and then, help them prioritize.
That's your carrot. They give you $50,000 in the second year to using the newly defined priorities and network that you put together to do a project.
The seed project.
The seed project.
And do you know what MVP stands for? It's the state developed what they call the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program.
Okay,
so MVP, and every city or every municipality in the state that did an MVP planning grant, then, and gets this plan certified, then is eligible for MVP action grant, which allow them to implement these projects.
I appreciate the background.
Yeah, of
Thank you.
course.
I can talk to you guys later, but, it's in, the city employee definition is including Sarah and I. And so I
Really,
think
we're kind of
there's
add-ons.
six, so there's 8 of us instead of
Yeah.
6 of us. All right. I'm feeling a little time constrained, so I want to talk to you guys about my involvement.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I have to step back a little in MVP 2.0, not the committee
Right.
itself. In order to do the committee, I might have to
Yeah.
to do that, but we'll do that.
What's it, is it Kim, Gillette, is she
Yeah,
part of this next group? Okay, good. She's
she's
good.
one of the ones you can.
She
look
is,
at.
yeah.
Yeah, she's pretty good.
All right, well, oh, Andy, super briefly, but I just wanted to touch on what you had mentioned the other day, about communicating with the ZBA about sea level rise.
Oh,
Can you just update the group on?
yeah, I mean, just
the language
really
you're
briefly,
providing?
I don't, it's obvious to me, and this is true of a lot of municipalities, right? But, the continuity of things that happened decades ago and sort of like understanding how they all relate to each other. So, and I just happened to come across something else today that illustrated it's a bigger issue. So, the Plum Island Overlay District was established in both Newbury and, Newburyport, for a very specific purpose, or at least sort of 2 specific purposes. One is because the barrier of each island was not supposed to be overdeveloped, that's sort of counter to, the stated purposes of the Commonwealth of what that island, should be, to encourage growth there. So the Commonwealth basically said years ago, prior to my time here, we'll help you to fund the infrastructure, put water and sewer out there, for some of the issues we have, but we don't want to be contributing with this infrastructure to further growth and development. That was kind of what they put in there. However, the real mechanics of how that also gets worked out is you look into the administrative consent order, which is part of that agreement with the Commonwealth to resolve the issues. If the state's going to give funding for that infrastructure project, here's the agreement with DEP to not encourage growth. That agreement included the Plum Island Overlay District, essentially saying, the community is going to have some limits of some sort on growth and development. However, if you actually pan that out and you see how it works, there's ability to have, an additional bedroom here and there for some of the units. If they haven't got to 3 bedrooms, they could have another unit, one room, I should say, added to, some of the buildings, so that you could have a number of bedrooms, which is, gallons per day of usage of water, as well as growth, so to speak, on the island. So it's both public and private investment in infrastructure in a hazard prone area, right? So, all those things kind of combined, recently, seeing the ZBA permitting projects over the years, just sort of recognizing if you drive out there today, you might see whether it's in Newbury or in Newburyport, some, like what used to be a cabin is now a giant, thing, 3 stories, and then, fills out the lot. And not taking any, stance on that individually for each one, just recognizing that it seems kind of inconsistent with what the established purposes were of that agreement originally in the Plum Island Overlay District. It's sort of a general comment, we've sort of modified a bit, but basically a general comment from the planning director to the ZBA when they're looking at a substantial expansion, maybe not the smaller things where someone's putting an entry, door and, some sort of issue like that, but someone who's doing like a wholesale replacement, or they're doing a substantial expansion and they want to make their case, as they're entitled to do before the ZBA to do an expansion, that the ZBA should be looking at as part of the criteria, the purposes of that district before they decide what they have to decide, which is whether or not it's substantially more detrimental to the purposes of the district, right? So if they look at the district and they say, well, the purpose is to limit growth, should we really be encouraging or allowing someone to do a 50% expansion of their home, or, whatever that threshold is? I'm not picking a threshold per se, but just being more cognizant of that. And this is totally separate from whether or not there's any changes to zoning, that's a separate, thing the council would have to decide as a body, to do it at any point. But at least the ZBA in the current regulations, kind of flagging for the volunteer members, because remember, they're all volunteers, as much as they might have some knowledge in the area, there might be a lot of them are attorneys, understanding, how this all fits together, and that's one of the key things they should look at. So if they're looking at a substantial expansion, they should be putting the brakes on for a second, saying, critically analyzing, is it warrant an approval from this board, or is it more reasonable to say to the applicant, look, you can work with the structure you have, modify it, replace it or expand it, or do something, that isn't quite so substantial. That might be a more appropriate thing to do from a long-term planning perspective than just like, if you look at this photograph right here, like, just kind of illustrate like what the island used to be versus what it is today, And again, not taking a stance on any particular application, but just recognizing that the individual boards and doing piecemeal permitting can, sort of go in the opposite direction or substantially increase that problem for us having more public and private infrastructure in Hazard Way, having more constituents living there that are then expecting the council to do a bailout of whatever issues arise there. So there's different ways of looking at it, and it's in no way, shape, or form sort of to penalize the folks who have properties on the island, but just recognizing that those inherently come with more risks and contribute to the problems with the water and sewer system, which is unique vacuum system out there, that it creates multiple layers of problems. So it's just generically one way or the other, whether or not there's any further changes in the regs or if the board issuing individual permits incrementally, again, being more cognizant and more critical of what kind of growth makes sense and where, just like the water supply is.
Did they have a lot of questions about it? How did they receive all that?
No, I mean, there are some folks who are a little bit more involved, like the real estate side of things, right? And so I understand, folks might, sort of reticent about the idea of sort of saying to someone, well, you can't quite do the expansion you want to do, right? And some of this actually just comes from the disconnect at the state level, where the state level basically says, well, there's a streamlined permit process for someone to come in before the board and present their case. You come in for a special permit or a variance or whatever. The board still ultimately has to make the determination, right, of whether they're going to grant that relief from the otherwise applicable standards or thresholds, right? And so there's kind of like a gate valve that can be open, and it can create incrementally a lot more over time if you accumulate it all together. And that's not necessarily noticed. And there's not anybody from the years ago, when part of my time when the administrative consent order and the Plum Island Overlay District were established, there's not really a strong point of continuity, so to speak, from that dialogue to today about what's happening. And it's not like the DP is here to say, like, we're revisiting this to see like how you're doing on growth on the island. If they were, they'd probably be saying, all right, let's have a discussion, is it going the right direction or not? I don't know if we've reached a threshold per se, but we certainly need to be more cognizant of it, because the more that happens out there, whether it's more money in public infrastructure or private infrastructure, being in Hazard's Way, or more demand on water that's going through that same vacuum system, or it does or does not work, it has issues, we should be more critical.
They also have, the substantially more detrimental thing seems like pretty subjective determination on their part, and they've got decades now of precedent of doing it a certain way, but that's probably what they rely on in terms of any criteria to use. So to have them be able to, the ZBA, to make different decisions now after all that, they'd have to almost be like told to, or give permission to somehow go against some of their precedent moving forward, correct?
Yeah, well, I actually read it sort of like they have the ability internally on their own, essentially, to say, well, maybe we've done that previously, but we're not going to be buying the attorney's argument, and that's precedent setting, right?
Yeah.
What we're saying is, we're going right now, properly, as we should be in any case, back to the purposes, statement of the ordinance, the way it's instructed, what it says today, and we should, as a body, doesn't matter whether our membership rotate or different people or whatever the decisions were then, putting those aside just for a second, if we look at this one independently, this application, is it substantially more detrimental because it's a substantial expansion, or is it more like a comparable, replacement for what's there?
Right.
And then that's okay, because it's not a substantial expansion.
Yeah.
So I think it's more the board on its own, I think, can kind of say, we're not bound by this quote, precedent setting of past decisions, and it's not that every project out there is an issue. It's just that, like, you can definitely see there are some bigger ones, some of them in Newbury, they're just big, giant buildings being placed in small places. So.
Andy, what's the onboarding for new ZBA members? Is there training or onboarding?
I reached out when new members are coming on, we try to reach out to the members, go over background information, context, so forth. But, their appointments are coming from the mayor, they go to the council for appointment, for confirmation and whatnot. We try to, as we're getting awareness, if we're not already aware, the names, we reach out and try to give them some background information. But we've also talked about, like, is this one of those things where we have a more focused, kind of educational session,
opportunity there.
Yeah.
To present some information that we have readily available, like from the mine app, like just to give that context. That our zoning doesn't reflect the future flood areas, but we might as well know about the future flood areas.
I think it definitely does, and I think maybe back to something that Julia's alluded to, like, I think part of the problem too is because of that context, like with some of these folks, looking at it from a real estate lens, for instance, or free market, versus like government regulation type perspective, right? There are boards sort of adjudicating, Are the regulations too unreasonable to allow something to reasonably happen? That some of them might have the philosophical perspective and they might sort of look at it from a legal construction saying, well, unless the council or the city council is more specific in the regulations and saying we shouldn't be doing this, more instructive in the zoning, then they might say, well, it's not really clear that, they might say, it's not quite clear enough to me, it's a little bit unambiguous, right? And that's where the council, for instance, might have a better, role or stronger role in basically saying, this is what we mean when we say, intended to limit growth, future growth, not preclude people from rebuilding their house, maybe that's what those, but to have future growth. It might be that then some of those folks are saying, well, we'll feel better about saying no to some of these big, I think right now the board is a membership that is cognizant of those things, right? But it's just because the memberships fluctuate, it might be good to think about what does the ordinance say, and the council be more clear one way or the other if it cares,
I think it's a good idea.
about,
And they're volunteers. It takes a brave soul to stand
does.
up and say, oh, I know we've done it.
Yeah.
I've loved it this way for the last
well,
however
and
long.
especially if you have
But,
to
if you really look at the letter,
Exactly.
It's just hard.
That is.
so I think let's keep that in mind
Yeah.
in terms of onboarding or,
Yeah.
something that the council might support, sort of a change
Yeah.
of view.
it's easy for the city, for all of us, like collectively, everybody collectively, to kind of kick that can down the road effectively, because I'm not saying we want to do that here, obviously, but like, it's easy for it to happen and for no one to really be addressing this issue, and then the city to collide with decades later much bigger problems that could have been reduced or mitigated or
Mhm.
minimized to some degree, but because no one's really doing anything about this issue, it just keeps, compiling and accumulating, and then it's a huge crisis, a bigger crisis than it needed to be at some future point. If we can see these trajectories like this, we should do a better job of aligning those things. And whether that's through the board's permitting of the current regs, or it's the council looking at the codes and saying, well, maybe we should change or tweak how things are done. Whether or not, any individual member of the body as a council is willing to say, well, we need to maybe tighten regulations in some way, and whether there's a willingness to do that, because in some cases debate about, free market and property rights, and, you have that kind of discussion. So, I think you have to weigh that against the public interest, and, if the council is later going to be asked to bail everybody out and, cover the cost of whatever it is.
As
or,
a culture, we're really bad at preventative medicine. And that's what this is. All right,
Let's
let's
talk
not-
about that more next week when we meet.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Newsletter, I haven't even thought about newsletter, I have to admit. But I'm realizing, I don't think we sent even the paper that came out of the ad hoc committee to our resiliency list. So in terms of maybe even just like a short update of, what we've been doing, what the ad hoc committee's been doing, and then a link to that would be a good communication. So Sarah, I'll work with you
And
on
then
that.
we could do.
And 2.0. So there's, two things. I think it could be quickly put together. I can do it, but I need help thinking about it. All right.
You can do the formatting.
I'll do the formatting, the fun stuff. Grants and funding updates. Do we have anything? I know Julia.
Can I do another communication?
Yeah, sorry.
For that, so there's just a storm surge speaker over the next 2 months, that might be of interest. So Erica Spanger from the Union of Concerned Scientists is gonna speak in February. And her topic is gonna be, now that the UN has confirmed that we're over the 1.5 C warming limit, that was put together for the Paris Agreement, where do we go from here?
They're at 12 midnight, I got it right
So that
there.
should be an interesting one. And then in March, March 5th, Emma Gildstein from the Nature Conservancy. She's been working in a number of communities on coastal relocation, which is the new term for retreat.
The better word.
It is a better.
Yes. And doing community conversations. So I have to confirm with her what the actual topic will be. We had suggested that you kind of summarize what you learned.
Maybe that'll
I think
work.
we're looking at it as another opportunity for a community conversation here. So it'll be somewhere probably in between those two. Summary, yeah. Go ahead.
Who is she with again?
Nature Conservancy.
What are the dates for looking?
February 5th and March 5th.
Thank you. We've been talking for a little bit or a while about a Cashman Park MVP grant proposal. And we're holding back on that. A few of us talked about that have been most involved in it, until 2.0 is wrapped up. I think, yeah, in terms of capacity, staff capacity, this group's capacity, and what we might learn from the 2.0 process, I thought it would be best to hold off on that.
But the other
Guys,
three
somebody-
that we talked about last month are supposedly going forward with the January application deadline.
The other three, what?
The
Oh, yeah.
ECO one-stop grants.
Mhm. Those.
Yeah. For
So
the
that was
sidewalls, the dam for artichoke and the trees that, but no. We're everything about it. Who's working on
Nancy?
Was Nancy working
I don't
on
know.
without including?
I thought when you said they were going forward, they were going.
That's what they said. They did an
Like we
EO.
did.
They did the expression.
What did they do? I can't.
She
Yeah.
said
What's in
the
the notes?
expression of interest in December supposedly.
Yeah, but then the individual grants are probably due different times.
January. No, it's
All
all.
sometime this
one
month.
time.
Let's check in with Nancy and
Yeah.
find out where we stand on that.
Kim initiated the damn one.
What?
Kim initiated the damn one, that's all I know.
Okay.
She worked with Nancy, and Nancy's definitely the
Did
go-to.
they
And
do-
she'll be on it,
before they-
Oh, yeah.
Did they go beyond the expression of interest? Have they done the application for it? Do we know it's like January 20th?
I'll check in with Nancy and Kim on that.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding us about that, Sarah. MVP apps, okay.
It's the
EO.
Eco one stop.
Yeah, Eco One Stop.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, resiliency checklist, no update. And I promised I would follow up with you.
Yeah.
Can we, after this, because we're gonna wrap up in a minute, just
Yeah.
stick around and we'll figure out a date. And
Yeah.
I won't let either of you out of the room until I do. And Sarah, we had talked about the resiliency
Yes.
checklist. I've decided, it's housed somewhere in the city, and so it might as well wait until we get it finalized in the very short future and send it to you, because it's kind of piecemeal right now, but it'll
Sounds
make
good.
sense when I get it to you. I'm sorry I didn't follow up with that.
Just Sarah, I don't know if Sarah has the context, so we talked initially when this came up, the concept was like, it's part of the current process, might be like a portion of.
Jane had filled me in a bit on
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
And it sounds like initially it would be something maybe that would be encouraged as opposed to required. Is that
Right, but it
Yeah.
might.
like a soft rollout? I kind of like
Right.
that. Maybe get some feedback on it.
Right.
Yeah.
right.
But we'll follow up.
Thank you.
On that. City projects, I just realized, and there might be others that we want to touch on it for just a couple of minutes, but, the ad hoc committee, there was a strong encouragement for that to continue with the new council. Sarah, was that brought up at all in your last meeting?
It did come up. One of the counselors brought it up to council president and, she said that, she would get on it, but nothing tangible happening yet. But I think there's enough of us who will be kind of, making sure that it happens. Because it's clear that, that at first ad hoc only got us so far, and it makes sense to reform and keep working, I think.
And the report got carried over in council to this next session, right, in committee, is that right? And
It did.
Is it
So
Public
it's-
Works?
so there's a.
That
vehi-
sounds right.
There's a vehicle, so to speak, if nothing else comes.
Yeah,
in,
so we
there's a
have that
vehicle to pick up
report
the-
and
yeah.
it's in Public Works and Safety. Afroz Khan is now the chair of that committee and was, of course, involved in the ad hoc. So that seems like a good place for it to sit until we can kind of
Right.
relaunch. Yeah.
Right.
Does anyone else have any other updates they would like to share in the last couple of minutes before we split? No? All right, I'm gonna follow up with Dan from Water and so, and see if they would communicate. I hope everything's all right. That will get him here. Thank you all,
All right.
and you two aren't allowed to leave until we get our calendars.
Are you looking to also, I'm just curious, are you looking to pull in also just for